It was supposed to be a simple detour. Grayson Hale, founder of Hale Tech and the golden boy of Silicon Valley, was in New York for a press conference. His driver had called in sick, so he'd decided to drive himself, a rare, spontaneous choice. Dressed in a tailored coat and clutching an overpriced coffee, he hadn't expected the GPS to glitch in the middle of a gray and crumbling neighborhood. Concrete buildings loomed like forgotten relics. Storefronts were either boarded up or spray painted in angry streaks. Streetlights buzzed dimly in the late afternoon haze. This wasn't the New York Grayson knew from luxury hotels and rooftop bars. Recalculating, the GPS repeated uselessly, the screen frozen on a blank map. He sighed, leaned out the window of his sleek black sedan, and scanned the sidewalk. Most people avoided eye contact, if they noticed the car at all, but one figure stood out, a girl in a dark hoodie, young but not a child. Her face was dirt-smudged, her expression unreadable. She stared right at him. Without really thinking, Grayson called out, "Hey, can I ask you something?" She didn't flinch, just stepped a little closer, her boots scuffing against broken pavement. "Depends," she said, voice low but clear. "I'm trying to get to 8th and Eldridge. My GPS crapped out." The girl tilted her head as if weighing whether he was worth helping. Her eyes flicked to the car, then back to him. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're way off," she finally said. "You took the wrong turn." "Clearly." He forced a half smile. "Can you tell me how to get back?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down the street, then pointed toward an alley. "Shortcut's faster. I can show you." Grayson hesitated. She was a stranger, and this place felt like a different world entirely. But something about her, the steadiness in her gaze, the quiet confidence, made him trust her, irrational as it was. He glanced at his watch. If he turned around now, he'd be late anyway. "All right," he said, "lead the way." She didn't introduce herself, just turned and walked, and he followed. The alley swallowed them in shadows. He had no idea he had just taken the first step into someone else's story, or that his would never be the same again. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was calculated. Grayson followed a few steps behind the girl as she weaved through narrow side streets. Her hood stayed up, casting a shadow over most of her face. Occasionally, she'd glance over her shoulder, not nervously, just enough to make sure he was still there. She didn't speak, not a single unnecessary word. And for a man used to boardrooms, PR pitches, and tech expos, the quiet unnerved him more than he cared to admit. The buildings on either side grew closer, almost suffocating. Trash bins overflowed. Faded posters peeled from cracked brick walls. A cat darted past them, chasing something invisible. Grayson's polished leather shoes tapped against the uneven pavement, while her steps were almost soundless. Finally, at a small fork in the alley, she stopped. She raised a finger and pointed left, toward a narrow passage half covered in scaffolding. "That way," she said, her voice soft but certain. Grayson squinted. "Are you sure?" She nodded once. "It's faster." It wasn't just the shortcut she meant, he realized. It was how she moved through this maze of back streets with an eerie sense of familiarity. Like she belonged here. Like the city had pushed her into its veins, and she'd learned how to breathe in its decay. "Do you live around here?" he asked cautiously. She didn't answer. A beat passed. Then she turned to continue walking, not waiting for him to follow, not even checking if he would. Grayson hesitated. In any other scenario, he'd be wary. A stranger in a hoodie leading him deeper into the city's forgotten skeleton? Every instinct screamed to turn back. But there was something oddly grounding about her. Not comforting, grounding, as if she knew the city in a way no GPS ever could. So he kept walking. They passed an old mural of a mother holding a child. Vandalized, faded, but still clinging to the wall like a stubborn memory. The girl paused for a moment, eyes flicking up at it. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Grayson noticed. He wanted to ask, but the look on her face stopped him cold. Pain, raw and wordless, hidden just behind her silence. She resumed walking, and so did he. Neither of them knew it yet, but in the stillness of that walk, something unspoken had already begun to shift. A thread connecting two strangers, woven quietly in the ruins of a forgotten city. They turned another corner, deeper into the maze of crumbling brick and iron fences. The city noises, honking cars, distant chatter, the mechanical heartbeat of a place that never sleeps, had faded behind them. All that remained was the occasional rustle of wind through chain-link fences and the low hum of a flickering neon sign above a long-abandoned liquor store. Grayson checked his phone again, out of habit. 2% battery. No bars. Seriously? He muttered. He tapped the screen. Nothing. Swiped up. The map didn't load. He held it up toward the sky like that would make a difference. Then, in an almost cinematic twist, the screen went black. Dead. He stared at the phone like it had betrayed him. This thing, this tiny machine that usually ruled his entire day, was now just a lifeless rectangle of glass and metal. Something wrong? The girl asked without turning. My phone just died, he replied flatly. She paused for half a second. Then I guess you'll have to trust me. There it was, the line that flipped the script. No longer a millionaire guiding his own day, Grayson was now at the mercy of a stranger in a hoodie, surrounded by graffiti-covered walls and alleys that didn't exist on any corporate map. Do you even know where you're taking me? He asked, only half joking. She glanced back. Yeah, better than your GPS did. He opened his mouth to reply, maybe a sarcastic quip, but said nothing, because she wasn't wrong. They crossed a narrow pedestrian bridge over a dried-up canal. On the other side, the air felt colder, heavier. Grayson felt his heartbeat rise slightly, not from fear, but from uncertainty. He wasn't used to not being in control, and still, he followed. Around them, buildings leaned in like eavesdropping giants. A broken street lamp buzzed above. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The girl didn't flinch. She moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Grayson realized something else, too. They hadn't passed another person in at least 10 minutes. Where is everyone? He asked. She stopped walking, turned her head slightly. People don't come here unless they have nowhere else to be. He swallowed hard. That was the moment he knew. Whatever this shortcut was, it wasn't just about saving time. It was about showing him something his world would never let him see. And now, without a map, a signal, or a clue, he had no choice but to keep going. The girl didn't slow down, even as the ground beneath their feet turned from cracked asphalt to broken concrete and scattered glass. Her boots crushed the debris without hesitation, while Grayson carefully stepped over shards of what used to be beer bottles, car mirrors, or something else long forgotten. Graffiti coated the alley walls like battle scars, not the kind curated by artsy Instagrammers. No, these were raw. Furious messages sprayed in bold, jagged strokes. Names of people no one remembered. Screams written in color. No home. No hope. Where were you? Still breathing. Each step forward felt like descending deeper into a story that had never been told. Do you always come through here? He asked, glancing at the walls, the ground, the shadows. Every day, she replied simply. Why? She didn't answer. They passed an old doorway sealed with rusted chains. On the wall next to it, someone had painted a mural of a boy with wings, reaching toward a sky painted in gold. Half his face had been blacked out by a splash of fresh graffiti. He died here. Grayson stopped. There was a weight in this alley. Not physical, but emotional. The kind that presses down on your chest without warning. It was in the smell of mildew, in the sound of the wind moving through hollow spaces, in the way his footsteps echoed longer than they should have. The girl noticed him lagging behind and finally turned. This place isn't on your maps, she said. I can see why. She stared at him, then looked past him, to something only she could see. People disappear here, she said, but not all at once. First their jobs, then their homes, then their names. Grayson swallowed hard. What about you? She shrugged. I haven't disappeared yet. There was something sharp in her tone, like defiance laced with exhaustion. Not asking for pity, just stating the truth. He looked around again. In his world, a place like this didn't exist. Or rather, it did. But behind tinted limo windows, softened by charity galas and quarterly donation reports. Never this close, never this real. A sudden gust of wind blew a plastic bag past them. It caught on a jagged piece of metal and hung there, fluttering like a defeated flag. Grayson didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. They kept walking. The alley narrowed even more, the sound of their steps bouncing off the walls. A distant metal door slammed shut somewhere far ahead, followed by silence. Thick, suffocating silence. And yet the girl walked on like she was leading him through a sacred corridor, one filled not with prayers, but with pain. They turned the final corner into what looked like a forgotten cul-de-sac, the kind of place even the city had abandoned. Weeds crawled through every crack in the pavement, and a bent street sign leaned like it had given up holding itself up. At the very end stood an old building, barely 2 stories tall. Its bricks were faded, windows barred or broken, and a rusted fire escape clung to its side like a skeleton. A flickering sign above the entrance read, Mercy House. Though most of the letters had long burned out, only Ma Sai still glowed, and even that was dim. Evelyn stopped at the steps. Grayson caught up, staring at the building in disbelief. "This is it?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "This is where I sleep." He stared at the cracked door, its paint peeling like old skin. A homeless shelter, he realized, or at least what was left of one. No security, no staff outside, no hopeful message about fresh starts. Just a door and the cold behind it. "You live here?" he asked, unsure if the word live was even appropriate. She turned to him slowly. "Number I survive here." The words hit harder than he expected. Evelyn pulled the door open. The hinges screeched in protest. Inside, the air smelled of damp clothes, bleach, and something sour. The scent of too many people crammed into too little space for too long. He hesitated at the threshold. She walked in without pause. Rows of bunk beds filled the main room, many without mattresses. A single light bulb swung overhead, casting shadows that felt alive. A man snored loudly in a corner. Someone coughed. A pair of children sat on the floor, silently sharing a can of beans. "This isn't a place you tour," she said over her shoulder. "You can wait outside." But he didn't move. Couldn't. Because between the beds, beside an old crate used as a nightstand, he saw it. Her space. Neatly folded hoodie, a torn blanket, and a worn-out notebook held closed with a rubber band. Everything she owned, reduced to a corner barely big enough to stretch her legs. Grayson took a step closer. "How long have you—" "Does it matter?" She cut him off. He didn't answer. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked up at him. "What did you think this would be? Some after-school special where you drop off money and feel better?" He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. She didn't wait for them. "I brought you here because you wanted directions," she said. "Well, this is where they end. For most of us, this is the last stop on the map." Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Inside, Grayson stood frozen, staring not at poverty, but at a girl who refused to let it break her. And for the first time in years, he realized he had nothing meaningful to offer. Not here, not to her, not yet. Grayson had never known silence like this. Not in a boardroom, not in a penthouse, not in the moments after a failed deal. This silence was heavier, not from emptiness, but from everything that was unsaid. Evelyn sat cross-legged on her worn blanket, elbows resting on her knees, hood still up. Her face was blank now. Not angry, not sad. Just still. Grayson shifted awkwardly, eyes scanning the cramped space she called hers. Beside the blanket was a crate that served as a nightstand. On top, a plastic water bottle, a cracked compact mirror, and a torn spiral-bound notebook held together with tape and a rubber band. The edges were frayed, pages curled with time and use. His eyes lingered on it. Evelyn noticed. "Don't touch that." But she didn't stop him either. Grayson crouched and gently picked it up, the rubber band snapping off with a soft flick. He hesitated, then he opened it. The first few pages were covered in sketches. Mostly eyes. All kinds. Wide, shut, crying, vacant. Some looked almost too real. Others were chaotic scribbles, as if drawn with shaking hands. He turned a page. There were words. Day 81. The roof still leaks. Layla cried again. She misses Mom's voice. I tried singing, but it made her worse. His eyes flicked down the page. Day 106. He came back to the shelter today. The one who yells. He kicked over the food crates. No one stopped him. Day 127. I found a photo. It's burned on one side, but I can still see us. Mom, Dad, me. Layla was just a baby. I remember that day. It was the last time I laughed. Grayson felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't just a journal. It was a record of survival, a child's attempt to make sense of chaos and grief. He turned to another entry. Day 142. I stopped dreaming. Every time I do, I wake up worse. Dreams lie, reality doesn't. He looked up at Evelyn. She wasn't watching him. Her gaze was fixed on something invisible across the room. A memory, maybe, or a moment she was trying hard not to feel. This is your sister? He asked quietly. She nodded. Layla's 8 now. And your parents? Gone, she said. One word, no emotion. Grayson looked back at the journal. Another page, a torn one. Only one sentence remained, scribbled in uneven handwriting. No one is coming, so I have to stay strong. For her, he closed the notebook slowly, like it might fall apart if handled too quickly. Evelyn finally turned her eyes toward him. They weren't tearful. They were steel. You wanted to see, she said. Now you've seen. And Grayson, he had nothing left to say, because for the first time in his life, a story wasn't about him, and he was beginning to realize maybe it never should have been. The night deepened, wrapping the city in a heavy silence only the forgotten corners knew how to carry. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then nothing. Inside the shelter, the dim light flickered above Evelyn's corner. Grayson sat beside the crate now, the journal closed on his lap. He hadn't moved in minutes. Evelyn still hadn't asked for it back. She finally broke the silence. I used to have a piano, she said, like it was a confession. Grayson turned to her, eyebrows raised slightly. An old upright, the kind you have to press hard just to get the keys to sing. My dad taught me. Chopin mostly. He liked the sad ones. The image didn't match anything about the girl in front of him. Not her clothes, not her tone, not the way she moved like she was always ready to run. But the way she spoke about it, that was real. What happened to it? He asked gently. She looked down at her fingers, dirt under the nails, knuckles scraped. The fire, she said. Same night we lost the house. A long pause followed. I had trophies too, she added, quieter this time. From school. Spelling bees, science fairs. I was that kid. You know, the one teachers said would go far. She gave a bitter smile. Guess I did. Just in the wrong direction. Grayson didn't smile. He couldn't. She leaned back against the wall, eyes unfocused. There was a bedroom with yellow curtains. My mom's idea. Said they looked like sunshine. I hated them as a kid. Thought they were too bright. Now I'd kill just to see that color again. Grayson said nothing. There were no business strategies for this. No fix-it solution. Just a girl peeling back, memories like old wallpaper. Layer by layer, each one stained with loss. How old were you? He asked. 12, she said. I remember waking up to smoke. Layla was still a baby, screaming. My dad didn't make it out. My mom got us to the lawn, then ran back in for a photo album. She paused. She never came back. A coldness settled in Grayson's bones. Evelyn's voice didn't crack. She'd told this story before. To herself, maybe, over and over, until it became muscle memory. After that, she continued, we bounced between shelters. Some were better. Most weren't. Eventually, I stopped asking when we'd go home. Because one day Layla did, and I didn't have an answer. She looked over at Grayson. You ever try explaining to a 5-year-old why she has to hide her socks at night so they don't get stolen? He couldn't speak. Because no, he hadn't. He'd grown up with private schools, winter vacations, and a housekeeper who folded his clothes by color. Evelyn's voice softened. You keep asking how I got here, but that's not the real question. He blinked. What is? The real question is, how did everyone let me stay here? And in that moment, Grayson Hale, a man worth billions, realized he was bankrupt in the one thing she still had left: resilience. The hum of the shelter faded into the background, swallowed by Evelyn's voice as she drifted into a memory too sharp to forget and too sacred to say out loud until now. "It started with the smell," she whispered. Grayson leaned in, silent. "I was asleep. It was winter." I remember that part because the window above my bed had frost on the edges. I always used to trace it with my fingers before falling asleep, like drawing snowflakes that melted under my touch. She swallowed. Then the smell came. Burnt plastic. Something thick. Ugly. I sat up and my room was glowing. Orange. Flickering. The kind of light that doesn't belong indoors. Her hands twisted in her lap. Fingers knotted together. I ran to the hallway. It was filled with smoke. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't see. I remember screaming for my mom. Then for Layla. She was in the nursery down the hall. The door handle was hot, but I opened it anyway. Grayson closed his eyes, picturing it. She was crying, red-faced, tiny fists in the air. I wrapped her in the blanket and just ran. Down the stairs, out the front door. I don't even remember touching the ground. Evelyn paused, her eyes glossy but dry. My mom followed us out. I thought it was over. We stood on the lawn barefoot in the snow, and I kept saying, "We made it. We made it." A bitter breath left her lips. Then she looked at me, and she ran back inside. Grayson's eyes opened. He didn't speak. She said she left the photo albums, the ones from when they were young. Their wedding, my baby pictures, Layla's first steps. She said, "I'll just be a second." Evelyn's voice cracked. I waited. I counted. I said her name over and over. I even screamed, but she never came out. The silence between them turned cold. And my dad, he never came out at all. She wiped her nose on her sleeve, almost embarrassed by the break in composure. But her eyes, sharp, dark, haunted, remained steady. After that, everything blurred. Sirens, flames. Someone gave me a blanket. Someone else held Layla. We were on the news that night. People cried. Donations came in. Then they stopped. Everyone moved on. She looked straight at Grayson now. But I didn't. The fluorescent light above them flickered once, then settled. I used to dream about that night, she added. Used to wish I'd run back in too. Maybe if I had, she wouldn't be alone in there. Grayson felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. All the wealth, all the control, all the curated order of his life. It meant nothing here. Because Evelyn wasn't broken. She was burnt and still standing. Grayson sat in the silence Evelyn's story left behind, his fingers clenched tightly in his lap. He felt like he'd swallowed something sharp, and it hadn't stopped cutting on the way down. The fire, the loss, the frozen lawn, her mother's last look before vanishing back into the smoke, and then, in a flash, something buried deep in his memory clawed its way to the surface. A headline. Easton Grove Redevelopment Project Approved. A photo beneath it. Bulldozers. Men in hard hats. A line of old brick houses behind yellow tape. He remembered it because his company's logo was stamped on every permit. Hailtech wasn't just building software. In recent years, it had expanded. Smart housing, urban innovation, real estate partnerships. Revitalizing broken communities, the press releases said. Out with the old, in with the future. Grayson had signed off on dozens of those deals. One of them, he suddenly remembered the name, Pine Hill Avenue. His chest tightened. He looked up at Evelyn, who was now pulling her blanket over her knees, as if trying to retreat from her own memories. Evelyn, he began slowly, the street where the fire happened. Was it Pine Hill Avenue? She glanced at him, surprised. Yeah, how'd you know? He didn't answer right away. He was staring past her, into the space where guilt had begun to fester. I think one of my company's projects demolished those homes a few years later. Her expression changed. Not shock, not outrage. Something worse, recognition. Like a puzzle piece she didn't want, but knew where it fit. They said it was for progress, she said flatly. New condos, better infrastructure. They didn't even bulldoze the ruins. Just erased the whole block. Planted fake trees and called it a community vision. Grayson felt his throat tighten. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, she said, voice quiet but sharp. People like you don't look down when you build up. The words hit harder than he expected. I was just a kid, she continued. I used to walk past those new buildings, the ones that replaced our house, and every time I did, it felt like someone had paved over my parents' graves. Grayson opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no defense, no explanation. Only the weight of knowing that somewhere in the mountain of blueprints, contracts, and profit margins, he'd buried someone's story. He looked back at Evelyn, the girl with the journal, the sister, the survivor, and wondered how many others like her he had unknowingly crushed beneath the banner of progress. And for the first time in his career, Grayson Hale didn't feel successful. He felt responsible. The rain started as a whisper, just a few drops tapping the rusted window panes like someone too polite to knock loudly. Inside the shelter, most had already drifted off into uneasy sleep. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed, then dimmed, giving the room a blue-gray hue as the storm crept in. Grayson sat on the floor beside Evelyn's bed, his back against the wall, arms resting on his knees, silent. Evelyn leaned her head back, staring at the leaking ceiling where a steady drip fell into a plastic cup someone had placed days ago. The sound was rhythmic, hollow, plink, plink, plink. She didn't speak. Neither did he. There was nothing left to say. Not after what had been shared, what had been revealed, what had been broken open. But silence had weight, and Grayson felt every ounce of it pressing into his chest. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. Fingers brushed against a slim leather wallet. He pulled it out, opened it, and took out a few folded hundreds. More than Evelyn had probably seen in months, maybe years. He didn't speak as he extended the bills toward her. It was instinct, his way of fixing things. Evelyn turned her head slowly, looked at the money, then at him, and she smiled. Not kindly. You think I brought you here to guilt you into charity? Grayson faltered. It's not like that. Isn't it? Her voice was soft, but the edge was steel. You heard my story, saw the cracks, and now you want to patch them with paper. I just thought that you could help? She shook her head. That's the thing about people like you. You think money is medicine? It's not. It's just a bandage on a bullet wound. Grayson let the bills fall into his lap. He felt small. Evelyn looked back up at the ceiling, rain still dripping steadily into the cup. You know what would help, she said after a pause. If people stop pretending we're invisible until our pain becomes inconvenient. Grayson stared at her, unsure what to do with his hands, or his heart. Evelyn pulled her knees to her chest. I don't want your money, she murmured. I want to stop having to prove I deserve more than this. Outside, thunder rumbled. A brief flash of lightning lit the shelter like a faded photograph. Cracked, imperfect, real. And in that moment, Grayson realized something terrifying. He had no idea how to help her. Not yet, not truly. But maybe that was the first honest step he'd taken in years. The next morning brought a pale, reluctant sun. Clouds still hung heavy in the sky, but the rain had stopped. The streets were slick with last night's storm, puddles reflecting fractured pieces of a sky that didn't seem ready to clear. Grayson and Evelyn walked in silence. Neither had slept much. They didn't say where they were going, maybe nowhere in particular. Just away from the walls, away from the drip, the stairs, the smell of hopelessness soaked into old mattresses. Eventually, they found themselves at a small park, one of the few places in the city where silence wasn't threatening. Just quiet. An old bench sat beneath a twisted tree, its bark dark from rain. Evelyn dropped onto it without a word. Grayson followed. Pigeons picked at damp breadcrumbs nearby. A man slept across another bench with a jacket pulled over his face. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played faintly, broken notes floating in and out with the wind. Grayson glanced at Evelyn. She stared straight ahead. I used to like suits, she said suddenly. Thought they meant something. that the people wearing them were smart, safe. He didn't interrupt. I remember one winter. Layla was sick, fever, shaking, the whole thing. I took her to this clinic downtown. We waited for hours. A man in a suit walked in. Everyone stood up, started whispering. He didn't even look at us. Her voice was steady, detached. He was part of a non-profit or some outreach group, gave a speech, took photos, shook hands, then left in a black car. She laughed once bitterly. No one treated Layla. We got turned away, no beds. Grayson looked down at his own coat. Tailored, dark, expensive. He suddenly hated how crisp it still looked. I stopped trusting people in suits after that, she said. They only show up when there's a camera, or when their guilt gets too loud. He nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling into his spine. I'm not here for photos, he said quietly. I know, she replied, but you're still wearing one. They both went quiet again. The wind brushed past, carrying the scent of wet concrete and old leaves. Evelyn leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I've seen more promises broken by people in polished shoes than by anyone sleeping on a bench. Grayson looked at her, not like a man seeing a problem to solve, but a person trying to understand another. And for the first time, Evelyn didn't look away. Dawn came slowly, not as light, but as pale fog. The shelter's windows were misted over. Breath turned visible with each exhale. Somewhere a heater sputtered, then gave up. Most of the people remained wrapped in layers of mismatched blankets, clinging to scraps of warmth like currency. Grayson woke with his back aching from the hard floor, a borrowed blanket barely covering his legs. The cold bit through his shirt like needles. His fingers were stiff, his nose numb. He turned his head. Evelyn was already awake, sitting upright, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her hoodie pulled over her mouth. She wasn't shivering, not visibly, but her jaw clenched like someone fighting something they'd grown used to losing. He sat up and looked around. Most people were still asleep or pretending to be. Outside, frost coated the cars and sidewalks, glittering beneath a bleak sky. Without a word, he slipped off his long black coat. Here, he said, holding it out to her. Evelyn looked at it, then at him. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, in something heavier, a knowing. She didn't move. It's warm, he added awkwardly. She took a slow breath, but didn't reach for it. Finally, she said, this isn't about warmth. Her voice was low, but it cut through the morning like glass. Grayson blinked. Then what is it about? Evelyn looked away toward the window, fogged with breath and memory. It's about what happens when this coat goes away. When you're gone. When the world goes back to forgetting we're still here. He lowered the coat slightly, unsure of what to do with it now. I've had warmth before, she continued. For a day, a night, a week. But warmth doesn't last. Not when you have to beg for it every time. Grayson didn't speak. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound like an apology. And apologies were just words. Too cheap in a world that had already taken everything from her. Evelyn sighed, finally taking the coat. Not for herself, but to lay it over a younger girl sleeping on the cot across from them. Her toes were turning purple, she murmured. Grayson watched the motion, the quiet grace in it, the sacrifice. She looked back at him. That's warmth. And for the first time, he saw Evelyn not as someone broken, but someone still burning in a world full of cold. Later that day, the sky stayed gray, heavy with promises of more cold. Grayson insisted on stepping out, said he needed air, but really he just needed to do something. Anything. Evelyn let him go, said nothing, and watched him disappear through the shelter door like a man drowning in his own guilt. An hour later, he returned with a brown paper bag, hot steam already seeping through the sides. Inside, grilled cheese sandwiches, warm soup, a bag of apple slices. Simple things. Real things. Not charity, comfort. I figured this is better than vending machine crackers, he said awkwardly, holding it out. Evelyn looked at it, then him. This time she took it. They sat against the wall again, sharing the sandwiches in silence. Halfway through, the shelter door creaked open. Tiny footsteps padded across the cold floor. A small girl, maybe 7, maybe 8, with messy curls, mismatched socks, and wide, curious eyes, walked straight toward Evelyn. She didn't speak. She just threw her arms around Evelyn's waist, bearing her face into her side. Evelyn's posture softened instantly, one arm wrapped around the child protectively. Grayson froze. The girl looked up at him, then quickly back at Evelyn, whispering something in her ear. "This is Layla," Evelyn said softly, stroking the girl's hair. "My sister." Layla peeked at him again, shy but unafraid. Grayson smiled gently. "Hey!" Layla didn't respond. She just pulled her sleeping bag tighter around herself, a faded pink one with cartoon stars barely visible through the dirt and wear. "I thought she was your daughter," he said, still stunned. "I became one to her," Evelyn replied. "She doesn't remember much of our parents. I'm all she's known for the past 5 years." Grayson's heart sank. Every hard edge Evelyn had built around herself suddenly made sense. This wasn't just about survival. This was motherhood in its rawest, fiercest form. "Does she stay here too?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "We stay together, always." Layla had now curled into her lap, already drifting off, fingers still gripping a torn corner of Evelyn's hoodie. Grayson stared at them. The suit, the sleeping bag, the bond between two souls who had nothing but each other. He suddenly felt overdressed, overprivileged, overwhelmed. "You keep her safe," he murmured. Evelyn looked at him, eyes unwavering. "That's the only thing that matters." And in that moment, Grayson realized this wasn't about rescuing someone. This was about witnessing something stronger than anything he'd ever built. A girl holding the world together, with nothing but grit, grief, and love. That night, the shelter was louder than usual. A new arrival had started yelling in one corner, cursing at the staff, throwing things. The tension was thick. People didn't react. They never did anymore. Survival demanded silence. Grayson stood near the door, his body tense. He instinctively reached into his pocket for a phone that was no longer working, forgetting for a second that there was no security here. No one coming. Evelyn, on the other hand, didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled Layla closer and calmly guided her to a quieter corner behind a stack of supply boxes, settling her down with a cracked storybook. Grayson watched from across the room. She didn't read the words. Not really. She made them up, weaving silly voices and happy endings from nothing but air and instinct. Layla giggled softly, her head resting on Evelyn's shoulder. It was the first time Grayson had heard her laugh. Later, when the shouting stopped and the room settled into its usual, exhausted hush, Grayson approached. "You do that every night?" he asked, nodding toward the book. Evelyn looked up, tired but alert. "Only when she's scared." "She didn't seem scared." "That's the point," she replied. She stood, gently covering Layla with their shared blanket. The child was already asleep, breathing slow and even. Grayson leaned against the wall beside her. "You're not just surviving." She didn't answer. "You're protecting her," he continued, "from all of this." Evelyn's eyes stayed on her sister. "She's the only thing that makes this place bearable. If she breaks, I break." Grayson followed her gaze. The sleeping bag, the frayed book, the cracked wall. It wasn't much of a fortress, but somehow Evelyn had turned it into one. "She doesn't know what we've been through," she whispered. "Not the nights we didn't eat. Not the times I had to pretend everything was fine while my stomach was eating itself alive." Grayson stared at her. "And you've kept her smiling through all of that?" Evelyn finally looked at him. "Wouldn't you?" He didn't answer, because in all his years of wealth, power, and influence, he'd never had to love anyone with that kind of desperation, that kind of sacrifice. "Sometimes," she added, "I think she saved me more than I saved her. On the nights I wanted to give up, she'd ask me to sing or tell her about the yellow curtains, and I'd remember I can't quit because she hasn't even started." A lump rose in Grayson's throat. In that moment, Evelyn wasn't just a girl in a shelter. She was a shield, a lifeline, a quiet warrior fighting a war no one else could see. And for the first time, Grayson felt it deep in his chest. This wasn't her story anymore. It was theirs now. The elevator rose in silence, slicing through the floors like a blade. Grayson stood still, watching the numbers light up one by one. 28, 29, 30, PH penthouse. His sanctuary, his fortress in the sky. When the doors slid open, the first thing he noticed was how cold everything felt. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The marble floors gleamed. The glass walls offered an unobstructed view of the city below, the lights twinkling like false promises. Modern art hung on the walls. The scent of expensive wood polish lingered faintly in the air. Everything was just as he had left it, and yet it all felt wrong. He stepped in slowly, coat still damp from the city's breath. His footsteps echoed in the vastness. Not a sound stirred, no voices, no laughter, no heartbeat, just silence. Grayson moved past the sleek kitchen, untouched. The refrigerator was full, everything organic, everything labeled, everything tasteless. He stopped at the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down. Somewhere out there, not even 5 miles away, Evelyn and Layla were likely huddled under a worn blanket, listening to rain drip through a cracked ceiling. He placed his palm flat against the glass. "I could fit 20 of her beds in this living room," he murmured, and it hit him like a punch to the chest. This place wasn't home. It was a museum of success, a collection of shiny things to remind him of the man he used to be proud of being. But now it was just empty. Grayson walked into his bedroom. The king-size bed was perfectly made by housekeeping, white, crisp, untouched. He sat on the edge, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He had spent years building this life. The right investments, the right headlines, the right image. And none of it mattered. Not after what he'd seen, not after who he'd met. He stood again, pacing restlessly. His reflection caught in the hallway mirror. Sharp suit, polished shoes, hair still neat. He didn't recognize himself. This wasn't the man Evelyn had looked in the eye. This wasn't the man Layla had giggled at. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same wallet he had tried to offer her money from. He stared at it for a long moment, then tossed it onto the marble countertop like it was something foul. In the distance, a thunderstorm was forming again. Raindrops began to tap against the windows, and for the first time in years, Grayson Hale felt poor. Not in wealth, but in meaning. Monday morning, 8 a.m. Grayson Hale had a full board meeting scheduled downtown. Quarterly earnings, investor projections, and a product launch he'd spent 2 years developing. He was supposed to wear a gray suit. He was supposed to shake hands, nod through graphs, and say phrases like long-term value and growth strategy. Instead, he stared at the suit hanging on the door for a moment and walked past it. He pulled on jeans, a plain hoodie, and the same weathered shoes from the shelter. His assistant called twice. He declined both times. Then he turned off his phone completely. Some meetings didn't need scheduling. They just mattered more. The city was waking up around him. Cafes steaming up their windows, taxis honking, sidewalks rushing forward like a heartbeat. But Grayson wasn't moving with them. He was moving against the tide, back toward Mercy House, back toward the only place where he'd felt something real in years. When he reached the shelter, he half expected everything to look different in daylight, maybe smaller, less intense, easier to rationalize. It didn't. The building still sagged under the weight of abandonment. The flickering sign still read, M. Psy, like even Mercy had gone missing. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent hit him first. Musty blankets, overused cleaning products, stale air. But something was off. No Evelyn. She wasn't sitting by the crate. Her hoodie wasn't on the bed. Layla wasn't reading. The journal was gone. He scanned the room, walked past the bunks, checked the corners. Nothing. His chest tightened. "Excuse me," he asked the woman at the front desk. "The girl who was here, Evelyn, with her sister Layla. Do you know where they went?" The woman didn't look up from her clipboard. "Lots of people come and go. But he paused. She had a little girl, curly hair, pink sleeping bag." Recognition flickered briefly in the woman's eyes. "They left this morning. Early." "Left? Where?" She shrugged. "Didn't say. Happens all the time. Sometimes they find another place. Sometimes they just disappear. Grayson stood there stunned. He had dropped everything, his schedule, his carefully curated identity, to return here. And she was gone. No note, no message, no guarantee he'd ever find her again. But somehow he understood. People like Evelyn didn't wait to be saved. They didn't pause for closure. They just kept moving. And yet, for a reason he couldn't explain, it felt like she hadn't really left. Not from him, not from this story, not yet. He didn't know what brought him there. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was that single word she had mentioned before. Pine Hill. Grayson took a cab out of the city's shine and into its rusted bones, past the glass towers, the cafes, the neighborhoods with curated aesthetics, into the places no one featured on postcards, the ones people only drove past, never into. He stepped out at the edge of a quiet block where the buildings ended abruptly, as if the street itself had been forgotten mid-sentence. And there she was, Evelyn, kneeling in front of what used to be a house, now just scorched earth and fragments of brick. The lot was fenced, but the gate had rusted open. A twisted skeleton of what once was a front porch still clung to the edge of the foundation. She hadn't seen him yet. Grayson approached slowly, quietly, not wanting to disturb what felt sacred. In her hands were two wilted flowers, one yellow, one white. No vase, no ribbon. Just stems wrapped in trembling fingers. She leaned forward and placed them gently on a slab of concrete. All that remained of the fireplace, maybe. Then she just sat, still, breathing in something that wasn't quite air. He didn't speak, not until she did. "It's today," she said, not turning. "The fire?" She nodded. 7 years ago. Grayson took a breath, but even that felt like an intrusion. "I didn't know where else to go," he admitted. "You weren't at the shelter. I needed to be here." He walked to her side and crouched beside her. For a while they didn't speak, just stared at the ruins, a place where memories still clung to the ashes, a place where laughter once lived and died. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I swear I still smell the smoke, even when there's nothing burning." Grayson glanced at her. "You come here every year?" "Every year," she said. "Same day, same flowers. Layla doesn't remember much, but I do. Someone has to." He wanted to say something comforting, but comfort was too small for this moment. So instead, he sat beside her in the dirt. Not as a billionaire, not as a fixer, just as a man, kneeling in the ruins of a story that was never his, but had changed him anyway. "You shouldn't have to carry this alone," he finally said. She looked at him, tired eyes, red-rimmed but dry. "I'm used to alone," she said, "but I'm not sure I want to be anymore." And for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like something else entirely. Connection. The next morning, Grayson returned to the shelter one last time. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to find her again. Maybe to ask the questions he hadn't had the courage to say aloud yet. Or maybe to say goodbye properly. But when he arrived, her corner was empty. The blanket gone. The crate bare. No Layla, no Evelyn, just silence. He stood there for a while, as if hoping she might walk through the door at any second with that tired half-smile and a sarcastic comment about him wearing the wrong kind of shoes again. But she didn't. Instead, the woman at the front desk looked up and said, "Someone left something for you." She reached under the counter and slid forward a small folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, the handwriting on the front careful but unpolished. It simply read, "Grayson." He opened it slowly, hands steady even though something inside him wasn't. Inside, just a few lines, written in the same ink she probably used to sketch in her journal. "You didn't save me. You just reminded me I could still walk." That was enough. Grayson stared at the words. Simple, sharp, undeniably hers. He read them again, then again. Each time, the weight behind them settled deeper into his chest. This wasn't a thank you. This wasn't closure. It was acknowledgement. A woman who had learned to survive without anyone, who had stopped hoping for rescue, had seen him, not as a savior, but as a mirror, a spark, a reminder that her legs still moved, that her story hadn't ended where the fire had begun. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat, the same one she had refused to take. Then he looked around the room one more time. Same broken ceiling, same flickering light. But it didn't feel the same, because now everywhere he looked, he saw pieces of her, the stubborn strength in the mattress seams, the soft resilience in the walls, the memory of her laughter echoing between the bunks. She was gone, but not absent. She had left him something more permanent than presence. She had left him a path, and for the first time in a long time, Grayson Hale didn't need GPS. He just needed to follow the fire. 6 months later, the corner of 12th and Mercer looked nothing like it used to. Where once there had been a collapsed parking garage and trash-stained sidewalks, now stood a modest but clean brick building. Not flashy, not towering, just human. The sign out front was hand-carved wood. No corporate logos, no shiny branding, just 3 words burned into the grain. Second Way Shelter. People asked about the name. Grayson never explained it in detail. He simply said, "Everyone deserves one." Inside, there were no marble counters or sterile white lights, just warm lighting, shared meals, and walls covered in artwork made by the residents themselves. There was a small library, a quiet room, showers with working water pressure, lockers with real locks, bunk beds with actual mattresses, and a single-frame photo hanging near the entrance. A pencil sketch of a girl in a hoodie, sitting on cracked concrete, her arm wrapped around a sleeping child. No face, no name, just presence. Only Grayson knew who had drawn it. Only he knew the story behind the soft curve of her back, the way the wind played in the loose threads of her hoodie. He had funded the entire project anonymously. No press release, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. His board had questioned him. His investors had pushed back. He didn't care, because some things weren't for profit. Some things were for penance and for purpose. One afternoon, while walking the halls, he passed a bulletin board where a young girl had pinned a hand-drawn picture of a house. Beneath it, she had written, "My second chance." He stood there for a long moment, reading those words over and over again. He never told anyone, but there was another reason he chose the name Second Way, because that's what Evelyn had given him. A second way to look at success, a second way to understand strength, a second way to live. He still carried her letter with him, folded tight, faded now. "You didn't save me. You just reminded me I could still walk." He'd built this place for people like her. People who never asked for saving, but still deserve safety, dignity, a door that opened when the world shut them out. Outside, the wind shifted, and for the first time in a long time, Grayson Hale didn't feel like he was climbing higher. He felt like he'd finally come down to where he was needed. The press conference was supposed to be about innovation. That's what the emails had said. That's what the investors expected. A grand reveal of Hale Tech's next chapter. Some cutting-edge housing initiative, a smart city expansion plan, a vision for the future. But as Grayson Hale stood behind the podium, flanked by cameras and microphones, he didn't talk about architecture. He talked about Evelyn, not by name, just by truth. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and began. "A few months ago, I got lost," he said. The crowd went still. "Literally, my GPS failed in a part of the city I'd never been in. I asked a girl for directions." He paused, let the silence hang. "She didn't give me a shortcut. She didn't lead me to my meeting. She took me somewhere else, somewhere I didn't know I needed to go." Flashbulbs popped. Pens scratched against notepads. "She took me to a shelter." He glanced down, then back at the crowd. "And in that broken, forgotten place, I met a girl who had nothing. No home, no comfort, no guarantees. But she had more strength than I've ever seen in a boardroom, more clarity than I've heard in any strategy session, and more purpose than I've ever felt from any title before or since." Murmurs rippled through the room. Grayson continued, "I've spent years building things, towers, apps, empires. But this girl, she built something out of ashes, out of nothing." He stepped away from the podium, voice softer now, almost like speaking to himself. "I thought I was giving her something when I showed up. Money, advice, direction. But the truth is, she gave me everything. He looked out at the room, past the suits, the reporters, the lights. She didn't give me directions, he said. She gave me purpose. The room fell silent. Somewhere near the back, someone lowered their camera. Grayson took a breath. And that's why this new shelter exists. That's why we named it Second Way. Because sometimes the road we think we're on isn't the one we're meant to follow. Sometimes we get lost, so someone can show us where we actually belong. He stepped down from the stage. No applause, just silence. The kind that meant something had landed, not in minds but in hearts. Outside, the city went on buzzing, blinking, breathing. But for Grayson, the map had already changed, not with coordinates, but with meaning. And somewhere out there, maybe watching from a distance, maybe walking another unfamiliar street, was the girl who'd redrawn everything, not with a pen, with a single choice: to be seen.